Hey fellow coders, this is your host Christoph Limpolair with ScaleYourCode.com, and today's guest has traveled from very far away. Now I can't claim it was for this interview, but it does make for an interesting story. His name is Florian Motlik, and he is the CTO and co-founder of a company called Codeship. Codeship is a service that lets you release more frequently so you can focus on building the products your users need. Basically, if you code and have to push that code live, you'll find this interview very interesting. So I want to break down this interview in three main blocks. And first, I'd like to learn more about Codeship because it has an interesting story. And of course, what better way to hear about it than from the co-founder himself? And second, I've got a few questions about your job as CTO. And third, I'd like to get into the technical details of how it all works. So Florian, it's a pleasure to have you on the show today.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be on.
Yeah, so let's start with this basic question. What gave you the idea to build Codeship?
Sure. Basically, because I had that pain myself. So I'm a person, I really like setting up like workflows and the processes and really try to make teams more productive. And so in different jobs or at university, I was always the guy setting up basically Jenkins or other like tools to set up the build, to automate everything and make sure it works properly, to make sure like there's an automated process for creating the IDEs, even that people use in a team, so everything is standardized and works really well. And that was painful. Like every single time, setting up the same thing, taking like a day or two to set it up. And then it's not just setting it up, but the whole maintenance part of it. Like you set up the servers, you run the builds, another team that uses the same system for running the builds comes in and updates their Postgres versions or installs something different on there. And then your build breaks and like everything just breaks down and you have to redo all that thing all the time because it's really hard to get it in a place where it supports a lot of different technologies and is easily to set up and maintain, and that was just hugely painful. And so as obviously the obvious choice was, let's just build a product out of this, which in hindsight wasn't that obvious, but it worked out, thankfully. And yeah, so that's where we started, that idea, and that basically came in, like started with the idea in beginning 2010 and really started talking to my two co-founders. So Manny, who is a designer and marketer by training, and Mo, who has a tech background and also a business background and is CEO of the company now. So from the beginning, we were a very diverse group of people. I think that's really important to have in the team. And I've known Manny from school, like since forever, and knew Mo from other startup stuff we did together also for a couple of years. Yeah, so that's when we started in like at the end of 2010, building the prototype.
Yeah, so end of 2010, about 2011. And when the company started, it actually started in Austria, right?
Yes, exactly. So we're all from Vienna, or we lived in Vienna in most cases for a while. So we started all in Austria, and there's a small but growing startup community and startup and tech community in Vienna. And yeah, that's where we started. And then through different steps, ended up with now part of the team in Boston, part of the team spread out over Europe.
And from what I read, you actually went from Austria then to Berlin, and then a few months later you moved to Boston. And as you just said, that was for Techstars, right? That's the reason you moved to Boston. And I'm really curious about learning more about Techstars. I mean, I've heard of it. I've seen video promotions. I've heard founders talking about it. What was your experience like at Techstars?
It was amazing in many different ways. So I think that's if anybody has the chance, especially first-time founders, to get into Techstars, definitely take that chance. I think what I really liked about Techstars is their focus on not just company success, but personal success. Like they do a lot of mentoring. They really want you as a person to grow and not just the company to grow. And I think that's really, really important. And I think that over time, over the next couple of years, we'll see a lot more successful companies that are not just founded and started with Techstars, but people who have been in a Techstars company and maybe the company failed, but then they start really successful companies. I think that mix of really focusing not just on company growth, but really personal growth is what makes, in my opinion, Techstars so unique and so great. Because we were pushed to a lot of different extremes by the awesome general managers here in Boston specifically. And the Techstars network is really great. The different teams, the different people, it really, in my opinion, Techstars starts not with the first day of the accelerator program, but with demo day. Like that's when the real Techstars starts, because that's when you can really use the network and really get started with getting the most out of that network in the longer term. I think that's the 3 months program is extremely important, but it's a lot more than just this program. It's just a lot more later stage stuff as well.
So you go through 3 months of a program, and during that time you get mentored by people like Jason Fried and Brad Feld and really top talent. Yes. If people listening aren't familiar with Techstars, I really recommend checking out the panel of mentors. I mean, it's an impressive panel, definitely.
Yes.
So what would you say was if you had to pick one thing that really helped kickstart your company from Techstars, you would say it was Demo Day, right? Or something else?
No, I think it's. I think that Demo Day, especially. I think that Demo Day is fun, but I think it's the whole. I think that's two sides. It's the relationship that Techstars can push you in, because they've, like, in the first weeks you get to meet so many mentors and investors and people now that have either invested in us or that we've that have mentored us and helped us for a long time. We've met in those first weeks in Techstars. But also that direct work that you do with the managing directors there, where you have like regular meetings every week about your company, and they push you a lot. And I think especially in our case, like, we had the 3 people managing the program, and they were all very different people. Some a lot more pushy than others. And I think that mix of the 3, where some people really pushed you extremely hard, or all pushed you really hard, but in a very different and unique way. Really helped us to grow a lot. I think that especially as just first-time founders, you need a lot of feedback, and you need people to really push you beyond your limits to really grow in that. And I think that Demo Day is a great culmination of the whole program, and especially for the companies, I think it's really important to have that day where, like, you kind of close off and then go further. But I think a lot of the relations that you build, especially with investors, are or have to be built beforehand. And I think that's And that's definitely something that we got told here in Techstars as well. Like, don't rely on Demo Day to meet investors or to get people. Like, most people that raised the round immediately after Demo Day have been talking to these investors beforehand already. So I think that Demo Day is a very important thing for the company, and it was a ton of fun to present. That was a lot of fun.
I really like that answer. That shows the power of human connection. It really does,
yes.
and the mentorship aspect of it. Much more important than the demo.
Absolutely. Demo Day is fun. Yeah. It's a lot of fun.
I can see it being fun.
Yes.
How did you get initial traction? Did you already have some before you went to Techstars, or did it really take off after Techstars?
So we got some people using it over time. So, like, in the 2 years basically that it ran beforehand, we got people coming in, we got interest coming in, and definitely after Techstars, as soon as we've also started to grow the team, raised funding and all that kind of stuff, just the growth became a lot stronger, since we also could just do a lot more marketing. And I think it's where a lot of resources also shifted from not just engineering, but we had enough resources to also do marketing, hire marketing people.
That's very important.
I think that, definitely. I think that over time, like, definitely in the beginning of a company, I mean, engineering or building your product is obviously the most important part. But I think over time, it's important to be able to make that shift from engineering and product development being a very important part. But I mean, sales and marketing becomes an equally important part, because just building the product, as everyone knows at this point, isn't going to get you any customers. You need to present it to them and put it out there as well. So I think that's a transition that happened to us over the last years, basically. And I think that's we had customers beforehand. Before we joined Techstars, that was one of the things that got us into Techstars, I think, because we were able to prove some things. But yeah, then definitely the growth phase was very different afterwards.
That makes me think of the whole lean startup movement, where you start with the product first and you validate that there is a market for it, and then you go full force with marketing, sales, and all that, keep building the product, etc. So would you recommend that as the way to do it?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely has to go somehow hand in hand, because I mean, you have to market your product during the development phase as well for a while, or first product phase, just to get that feedback. So I think it definitely goes hand in hand, but I think it's just a different, like, how many resources you put into which part of the company just changes over time. And I think it's important to understand when that change needs to happen, and yeah, when marketing and sales becomes more important over the lifetime of the company. And I think that's definitely also like the lean startup approach, where you would just try to learn from your market first, try to learn like what exactly customers need, build something, improve on top of that, is extremely important, and we're definitely following that. But yeah, it's knowing when to switch from a pure product development team, or more or less pure product development team, to marketing, and then to sales, and other parts of the company. It's definitely an interesting phase, and to learn all of that as a technical person, basically.
Mm-hmm. By the way, speaking of technical, what kind of technologies do you use in your infrastructure?
So we started on Ruby and Rails, basically, for the web front end. We do a lot of Go now, so Go web services. We have a lot of stuff, mostly or pretty much all of it runs on AWS. Mm-hmm. We use different stuff like Packer, for example, to build our servers. Other technologies that we use, containers to run the builds in, basically. Mm-hmm. We're working with Docker now as well.
Yeah, and we'll talk a little bit more about that when we talk about Codeship as well. Just wanted to get a general overview of it. And I saw on LinkedIn as well that you use Redis for your web services aspect of it. What do you use Redis for?
Basically, backend worker processes. So basically, all the messages that get sent through the whole system of like, okay, which build should be running on which service now, or which server and backend server, and then sending all the log messages back, and for all kind of background workers, like also with Sidekick in Ruby, like sending out emails or notifications, all that kind of stuff. So we use Redis.
Queuing systems and stuff like that.
Basically mostly for queuing. Like we use it mostly for queuing, like a short-term queue, mm-hmm. And send through millions of messages a day, basically, at this point. So, and on a small like amount of Redis class, basically, that makes it extremely easy. Like Redis is so fast, especially if you just want to use it for short-term stuff, you just don't need a lot. If it's just for buffering, basically.
That shows you the power of scalability and resilience of Redis too. And I'm going to do a quick plug for one of my Redis screencasts. I've actually started a series on it, and I've got a few episodes so far, and I do plan on having a queuing episode as well. So if anybody listening is interested in adding Redis to your application, or even seeing the different use cases, definitely check that out, and I'll put a link in below the video as well. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about what it's like being a CTO, since you've had that experience for a while now. And I know that you guys have a few remote teams, right? You have a team that left or that stayed in Austria, and then I believe you have a few others in different cities, if I'm correct. Yep. Do you have any tips for managing remote teams?
Yeah, so I think it's definitely hard, and it's a lot of work. So we hired, in October of last year, we hired our VP of Engineering, Jim, who has a lot of that experience. And I think it's really important to understand that, especially when you go remote and want to grow the team fast, this is a full-time role. Like, you need somebody who's in one-on-ones, who talks to people and makes sure everything works out well together. And you need somebody to do that. And I think that was really important for us, having very open communication channels, and making sure that the remote people, and hiring remote people who are experienced in remote and really over-communicate is really important. There's a few things that are worse than a remote person who doesn't like to communicate, because you just lose sync very easily, and then nobody knows what they're working on, and if they're still productive, or if there's some off working on something else, or not working at all. And like, that just becomes hard to manage. So I think that's so we use I've done this, for example, a lot, which works really well. So we don't do any stand-ups, because they don't really scale for remote teams in our opinion. So we use I've done this. Everybody just puts in whatever they've done over the day, and then everybody the next day can just read that stuff. And at least for the engineering team, we do, like, every couple of weeks we do a whole engineering meeting, just to make sure everybody's together and can just talk about, like, next things that we want to do, challenges that we have and need to solve as an engineering team. And then there's a lot of one-on-ones. So there's, like, everybody, like, in the engineering team has a one-on-one with Jim, the manager, each week, just to discuss that kind of stuff. A lot of stuff happens on Slack. Developers try to do a lot of calls with each other when they're working on the same thing. A lot of, like, ad hoc, just jump into a call and talk to each other. But I think the most important part is really making sure that everybody over-communicates everything. I think that as soon as communication becomes low or limited in a remote team setting, everything starts to break down, because that's basically the lifeblood of the company. And it needs to happen a lot more than when you're all in the same office, simply because you don't have that, like, speaking over lunch, basically, like, which happens when you're in the same office. You just talk a bit about that stuff, and that needs to happen in a planned way in remote teams. But then I think they're extremely powerful for us also with hiring. I mean, hiring is a constant challenge, no matter where you are. And so being able to hire in the US, being able to hire remote people in Europe as well, is just a huge advantage for us in the short but also longer term.
Mm-hmm. And I've never had to do it, especially not different time zones like that. That sounds incredibly hard. And I think this will be really helpful for listeners who are either thinking about expanding to different time zones or remote teams in general, or have done it and are trying to find a way of finding that communication balance. So thank you for sharing that. What do you look for in people when you hire?
So I think that's, I mean, of course, technical excellence is an obvious one. Like they need to be really good at what they're doing and really understand whatever they're doing well to fit that role. And that depends if they're a senior, obviously, that's different than if they're a junior developer. But I think another thing that's extremely important is just kind of what we call it, like the willingness to win, like really being able to push hard, push each other hard, be very open in getting, but also giving feedback and criticism. I think that's something that is very important for us, and that to be able to like openly share anything that you think about like the current work of somebody in a very like in a professional and constructive way, so not in a personal way. I think that's also very important, but just being able to really say when something bothers you. I think these kinds of things, being able to communicate clearly and openly is really important. And then on the technology side, they just need to be really, really good at whatever they're doing. I think that's, I mean, of course there's the team or personal fit aspect of it, but sure. I think that's I think one thing that is really important and that we've certainly learned, and I think that other teams have learned as well, is personal fit doesn't mean, or team fit doesn't mean they're exact, like there is no, they're the same way as everybody else on the team, and there's no like basically trouble with somebody. Right, like I think that having troublemakers in there, I think it is important, or I think it's important to not say, okay, this person is really, really good at whatever they're doing, but they are not the easiest person to deal with. Then I mean there is a limit of, okay, can we as a team deal with like some of the other sides of a person, but does it outweigh like the whatever they bring to the team outweigh some of the challenges? Then let's bring them in and like let's make it work, and just have very open conversations about like how we think what needs to change and how we can work together on this. I recently read a book from Ben Horowitz, or I'm still reading it, where he talked about that exactly, of like a sales guy that still works for Andreessen Horowitz, who is apparently like the god of all sales guys, but kind of hard to deal with sometimes and can be abrasive. But he's really good. And I think that limiting the greatness of people that you hire by making sure they're just the nicest people is not a very good move. And that's not really what I think team fit is all about. It's not about will I be the best friend of that person? I think that's also something that comes with scale of the company. Like you don't have to build a company where like everybody's your best friend. You have to build something where you can work really well together and just share a lot of time and be able to really work well together. But in the end, like some of them are your best friends, some of them are colleagues, and that's totally fine. I think that's a shift that happens from like a small founding team or like a small team with early engineers, where like you have to stick very closely together. Where when you grow the team, like that closeness, it just can't happen with everyone on the team. So I think being able to have a very productive partnership with everybody is really, really important. And like the sports team metaphor is something that we really like to use internally, where like you have to get along, but you also have to push each other to really be the best that you can to really succeed.
I like that. That's a really nice goal. By the way, what's the name of that book? Was it Ben Horowitz?
The Hard Thing About Hard Things.
I thought that sounded familiar. I read that book. Really good book. Very good book. I highly recommend people check it out. I loved it. I got the audiobook on is it Audible? Yeah, audible.com. Very good book.
Yep, no, I agree.
Aren't you guys hiring right now, by the way?
Yes, we are hiring. We're basically always hiring.
Right.
As every startup. Basically, yeah. So we're looking for especially senior people, senior engineers, infrastructure engineers, people who basically know AWS from top to bottom, and want to work on something, especially that building something for other developers, which is just a ton of fun, because you get to basically talk to yourself or people that have the same interest like yourself all day and get to build cool tools for them, which they appreciate a lot. So yeah, if anybody's out there who really, really likes to build AWS from top to bottom, understands it very well, likes to do Go and Ruby, which are our main languages, but we're open to others as well, and wants to build stuff for other developers, let us know.
Take note, listeners, take note. All right, if you had any recommendation to give to someone who is about to become CTO or is currently CTO, what would you tell them?
Understand the change that's going to happen to you. I think that especially as a first-time CTO, like somebody who hasn't done this before, the change between going from a very technical role to a very non-technical role is something that is very hard. So I mean, and I like as a story, when I was in Techstars, and I keep telling that story to everyone asking me that question, but while I was in Techstars, we were like a small team. I was still coding all day, basically, or most of the days. And I was in a lecture or in a talk by somebody, CTO here in Boston from a very successful company. And he told us basically at some point, like his team, like he didn't really code a lot anymore. And at some point his team didn't want him to code anymore because his code wasn't any good anymore because he has so little time to code something, or there's only like few hours basically a day, if even, where you can code something. And that just isn't very conducive to providing good code. Like good code needs to have buffers. Like sometimes it takes longer, sometimes it takes less long. But you can't just say, okay, in these 2 hours, I'm going to write exactly this code in exactly this quality.
Right.
That's not how it works.
Oh, no.
and so that's something where, and I was sitting in there and thinking like, okay, yeah, I'm sure this happened to you, but it's never going to happen to me while coding. Like a couple of months later, this is exactly where I was and where I still am, of like not really coding a lot on the product side, because there's so much other stuff that needs to happen, from hiring in the past, from customer meetings, investor meetings, marketing, all different kinds of things that need to happen. I think that as a CTO, you really need to know and understand what that role can bring to you in the future. And if you want to be like this very technical, like team leadership and engineering leadership CTO kind of role, where it's more like a CTO or VP of engineering kind of thing, where like you lead the team, you're very technical, you might not code all day, but you spend your time in architecture and really talking to the engineering team a lot. Or you're more of the outward focused CTO and who like spends a lot of time with investors and all that kind of stuff. And if you really want to stay coding all day, you might find that the CTO role isn't the best thing. And you should definitely talk to your co-founders about that early. Because the problem is, if you grow into the CTO role where you don't code a lot, and then you decide, well, that's not really what I want to do, and then want to change back to coding, that's just a huge issue. And so I think that's something that just needs to be resolved early on. And like you need to talk to your co-founders early on about that and really think through like, what do you want to do? Do you want to stay a coder, which is totally fine. Like you don't have to be like a C-level as a technical co-founder. And there's many, many technical co-founders who are senior architects, who are coders, who just always say, okay, I stick to coding, and they're building and they're helping build great companies. But I think it's just something that needs to be discussed early on, because otherwise it can definitely lead to frustration. And that change going from a very technical role, something where most people have probably spent like at least half of their age or more building technology, and then you move to somewhere where like the main tool, your main editor is Gmail or whatever email tool you use. And like you don't have to like just work on one thing and then like one piece of code and then jump to the next piece of code and then the next piece of code. So very like serialized kind of workflow, which isn't fully true with coding. Like of course you jump between stuff, but not a lot. But if you are in that more management kind of role, like you jump between hundreds of things or dozens of things at least all day, every day. And like having the workflows down, knowing like, okay, how to efficiently write email, how to keep on top of my emails, how to keep on top of meetings and like my task and all that kind of stuff is something that I think a lot of coders and certainly I haven't fully figured out when I like had to do that transition. And it was painful, like transitioning into that, like learning all those new skills and at the same time not being able to use what I learned in the past and what I actually like to do was really hard. So I think that's something that you need to be fully aware of, that it's definitely coming. Like whatever you think is where you are today, that thing is definitely coming. And unless you manage it yourself and with your teammates, you're just going to have a hard time. So I think that's something that you definitely should work on and look into.
Florian, I was looking at the time and we're only 25 minutes in and there's already so much value in this interview. I mean, this is incredible just from this 25 minutes. Now I want to take a different little focus. I want to switch the focus here and I want to talk about what you've been posting a lot of posts about. I've seen them on Medium. I've seen them on the Codeship blog, all over the internet, where you talk about continuous integration and delivery as a service.
Mm-hmm.
But what does that really mean? Why are they so important?
Sure. I mean, in the end, we're now at a time where productivity of your engineering team has to be the focus number one of your team. Basically, with all the cloud and cloud services that have come out over the last couple of years, building an infrastructure and building the product has become easier than ever before. Like there's now so much competition, and it's so easy to just focus on your product instead of having to build your server infrastructure, your data, managing your database, all that kind of stuff. You can just push off into services. So it's really all about getting your product built and out there as fast as possible. And because it's a lot easier in terms of infrastructure and pushing it out there, there's a lot more competition now out there. There's, for every product idea that you have, there's probably already 3 other startups working on this.
Yeah.
And everybody tries to be as effective and as fast as possible. And so there's a lot of competition, a lot of market pressure. And on the other side, hiring is extremely hard, especially as a small team, but it doesn't get easier as a larger team. So you will never have enough people, and you have a lot of stuff that you need to get done. So you need to be as productive as possible, get stuff out there to your customers, and just get the feedback as quickly as possible. And so on the one side, you have to get stuff out there all the time, but you don't want to break it constantly for your customers, because as much as early users and early customers are able to deal with like downtimes or problems, like they're also going to jump ship at some point. Mm-hmm. So having continuous integration, which basically means that anytime your developer does any kind of change and pushes it into GitHub or whichever like code hosting service you use, you also run your tests automatically, make sure it all works together with all the other changes that your developers have done, just to like automatically test, am I doing the right thing? Have I broken anything? And if you've broken anything, you get quick feedback and you know, okay, you need to fix this. So this, on the one hand, guarantees that you're not constantly breaking things for your customers, but it also makes you faster because you don't have to take important time of your developers to just click through the application and make sure you didn't break something. Now, when you're iterating over that and like you already know that you've fixed, you haven't broken a specific feature or you haven't broken like other features with the new thing you're introducing, you can also go one step further and just push it out to your customers immediately and just say, okay, like this feature is ready or ready enough to show it to customers. Let's just push it out directly and get the feedback of customers on that feature and keep improving that whole lean startup cycle, basically. And so that's really what we're giving people as a service, where you don't have to manage the test infrastructure. We integrate with different hosting providers, different platforms that you want to push your application into. And so what your team now focuses on is only your code base. Your team focuses on like all the changes they do in different feature branches, and if they want to release something, they just merge it into the master branch or a specific production branch or wherever they want to have it, and then it just goes out straight to production. And they really, we call it like a repository-driven infrastructure, which means you drive all of your product and all of your infrastructure by doing changes in your repo, and your team and your developers focus only and work only in your repository and don't have to think about anything else anymore. So that's really a very powerful way to make sure you keep that focus, you keep the productivity of your developers, and make sure that you get the most out of the team. Because again, it's really hard to get more people, and you have to move as fast as humanly possible.
So let me make sure I got this right. We're basically adding a layer between when you push to GitHub and when it gets deployed to the server. And in that layer, you're going to boot up virtual machines to test the code inside the machines, make sure all the tests pass, and then if they pass, it automatically deploys to whatever server you have. AWS, Heroku, what's the other one? DigitalOcean. Yeah, it slipped my mind.
Absolutely.
Okay, so that's how it works, right?
Yep, exactly. And all of that with like a minute of setup. And I mean, as I said before, like that was the whole idea from when I started. Like, having to set it up, like spending 1 or 2 days just to set up the infrastructure, and then having infrastructure that doesn't really scale, because a test and deployment infrastructure for a team of 1 is very different than a team of 5 or 25, because then you get then you have to introduce different build servers, like a lot more, like you have to scale that infrastructure as well. And like you already have enough work to do with scaling your production infrastructure. Like why should you also scale your test infrastructure? And most people then don't, which means the test infrastructure isn't really up to par. And that's all, it's just painful. Like, and it just, it's really, it's unnecessary painful, and you just shouldn't be doing that. Like that's a perfect service where you can just pay somebody else, in our opinion, just get a better service, because like all they do is working on that. And the same reason why we use Heroku. Like for a lot of things, like I don't need to manage the database in detail. Like Heroku does a much better job, and it's much easier for me to just pay them and not have to hire like a really good DBA, because Heroku does a much better job than any single DBA probably that we could hire could do, because they have so much more knowledge and so much more scale than we could achieve on our own.
Yeah.
So I think that's.
I was going to say that, as you said, it takes a minute. I use Codeship, and the time to set it up is incredible. It takes no time at all. You just hook it up to your GitHub, and then you decide how you want to deploy or what you want to deploy to, and it takes care of the rest. And that's really the magic that I tried to figure out when I used Codeship and when I prepared this interview is, how does this work? First of all, how do the machines boot up so quickly, and then test relatively quickly as well, and then pushes everything for you, and how does it do it so seamlessly? So my next question to you is, well, that's exactly the question. How does it work? How do you boot up these machines so quickly? What kind of technologies allow you to do that?
Containers, basically. So we're all, and we have been using LXC for a long time in our infrastructure, and containers, and obviously with Docker have gotten a huge push over the last
LXC?
years. Yeah, LXC. So Linux containers.
Okay, yeah, okay.
So for quite a while, and yeah, so containers generally and Docker are an incredibly interesting technology that has been is on the cusp of changing a lot of the way we build and we think about infrastructure, I think. So I think we've already gotten some way over the last 2 years with Docker, and with I mean the whole industry. But I think we're just at the beginning of what those containers really mean, and how we're going to change everything basically. So yeah, those are very important technologies for us, and we hook up, like we have large servers that just hook into the queuing system on Redis. Basically, whenever a job comes in, we just read from that queue system, start a container for it, push the data into that container, and just run the build on that isolated container.
But how does it boot the container so quickly? I mean, do you already have machines that have it installed? How does that work?
Yeah,
help me understand.
Sure. Yeah, sure. So we have build servers. So let me walk a step back and how we, like the whole process of deploying and with that setting up the whole service becomes. So whenever we want to push a new release of our backend infrastructure, so the servers that run our builds, we of course push it through Codeship, and have been since 5th of May 2011. So it's been a little over 4 years now, which is a long time. I'm always amazed, like how long we've been doing this now. But yeah, so we push it with Packer. We create a new AMI on Amazon. So something that is really important for us is immutable infrastructure. So what we want to reach, the goal that we had from the beginning, was really to be able to replace any part of our infrastructure at any point automatically, especially for the backend servers, and really to push new upgrades to a server by just replacing that server and not upgrading it in place. Because we found that, especially when I was the only guy really building this, to be a much easier and much more straightforward workflow, because updating servers just always introduces problems. Like it works maybe 99% of the time. I think it mostly works like 9 out of 10% of the times. And that's just not good enough, because then many different times, like if you want to push a lot, even with 99% of the times, if you push 20 times a day, that means a deployment fails every 5 days. And that's just way too much. Like I really don't want to deal with that. So I want to be able to replace every part easily. So we built a new AMI, and that whenever we want to scale, we just start from that AMI. That AMI has pre-built container in it with all the different tools, all Ruby, like whatever we need in that pre-built container. and we just start from that AMI. And then for any build that comes in, we start from that pre-built container with everything inside and just all the configuration. We start from that, create a running container, and then just push the data into that running container and like build from there.
That makes a lot more sense. And then I know you have a premium product called ParallelCI. And from what I understand, that allows you to split the tests up parallel so that it finishes faster, right?
Yes, exactly.
How do you do that? How do you split those tests up between different containers so that it goes faster? How do you make sure that they don't collide, or does that make sense?
Yeah, sure. No, it's you can consider it as basically running different builds. So ParallelCI basically pushes not just one build into our infrastructure, but basically like if you have parallelized on 5 machines, so 5 pipelines, just runs basically 5 builds, and we just collect the data out of those 5 builds and push them, like show them to you together. But that's basically what it does. Is like you give us different commands, and from those we create different sub builds basically that are run somewhere in the infrastructure on completely, mostly on completely different backend servers. So they're completely isolated from each other, and then we just collect the results and just show them to you, combined again as one build, but like combined again, but still separate in terms of the UI in some way.
Okay, and you can choose that amount as well. You can choose how many containers and how many run in parallel, depending on how much you want to spend on it. It will make it go faster.
Exactly, and we've seen people like increasing their speed by 50, 60, 70%.
Wow.
Depending on like how much parallelization they want to run.
That's incredible. Almost sounds like magic.
Yeah.
So once we have a successful push, right? We pushed it with GitHub and all the tests pass, we're good to go. Then what happens? How does it deploy to the right area? You know, how do we deploy? For example, if we want to deploy to code deploy, how would that work?
Sure. In the end, it's a different set of shell commands basically that run. So it's either our own integrations, which just give you like, you give us some in the UI, you give us some config parameters, and we just translate them into specific shell commands that are used to push somewhere, or like specific scripts that we've written. So that's for our internal integrations. But you can also just in the end say, okay, just run these commands for my deployment. So run cap deploy, for example, if you want to do Capistrano or whatever, basically. Like we give you a way to run any kind of shell command that you want to run for your deployment, and mix and match them with our integrations and whichever way you want to do that, and set up different like deployment pipelines for different branches of your repository. And then we just run those commands for you. So it's relatively straightforward. You just give us the commands that you want to use, either by like putting them into our nice UI integrations, or by just giving us straight commands to run, basically.
So you just give Codeship the different settings that you have for your servers, cat deploy, that sort of thing, where it needs to deploy, how, all that, and that it just takes care of everything for you.
Yes, exactly. And so you don't have to think about deployment. I mean, I think that's something where, like, with what I mentioned with repository-driven infrastructure, where like your developers should only, like, the only thing that they should think about when, okay, I need to deploy this is, okay, I need to merge it from like this feature branch I have into master. Like as soon as I've merged it in there, it'll automatically go through all the processes and test it and then deploy it and notify me if anything goes wrong. But if everything goes right, like it just deploys. And all I have to think about is like that merge. So it's really, you lower the barrier for any one of your developers, or not just developers, but anyone in the team basically, to deploy something by making it something that gets triggered through the repository, and which means it gets triggered by something that you're very accustomed to use all day anyway. So it's very easy. There isn't really any large barrier to entry, and yeah. So we found that to be, especially when you onboard new people, extremely helpful. So something that was like that really showed me that power of that workflow in the beginning was when we onboarded somebody new, and he wanted to do changes to our DNS system, and I just needed to point him to like a repository that has a JSON file and like a small gem that we use to push into DNS simple, and they just needed to go in and like change the JSON file in the way they need it, open up a pull request, like change the JSON file. Somebody else on the team just reviewed the changes, merged it into master, and now the DNS was changed. And like they didn't have to know anything about DNS simple. They didn't even have to know like which DNS provider we used. That just didn't matter at all. And if we change the DNS provider, nobody would care really in terms of like just the development effort. They just go into that repo, change whatever they need, merge it into master, and it just goes out. And you don't have to know any details about your production infrastructure, especially when you begin, because that's all hidden away from you. That's just the system taking care of it. You just need to set it up once, and that's it. And I think that just really takes away many of those discussions of where either only a specific person can deploy to, like, for example, your DNS, or you have to discuss, like, okay, show them how exactly are you going to use it. And when I just, instead, like, any developer can just read a repo and understand what's happening there. If it just can point them to a repo and say, like, hey, edit this JSON file, like, you'll understand the syntax, you'll understand exactly what it does in a second, and just go for it. I think that's a lot more powerful than having to describe all the different services that you're using.
Then would you say this is also really beneficial for a one-person team or a two-person team, or is this really more for bigger teams and bigger projects?
So I really started doing all that kind of workflow when I was the only person. I think that's even for smaller teams, it's kind of even more important in many ways, I think, because like you need to be even more productive. Like if you're a sole developer and you just need to get this out as fast as possible, like any process that can help you with like automating some of your stuff away and just making sure that you don't break things, because that's like breaking something, especially in a small team, is such a huge waste of time and such a drag on the whole company, because basically everybody has to stop working. Like in a large team at the size that we're now, like there are some people who are going to fix the issue, but the other people can still keep working and you can keep like pushing out new stuff. But in a small team, like when something breaks, when I was the sole developer, like everything else just stops. Like all other tasks, everything that still needs to happen for the company just stops to fix that one thing. So everything you can do early on, especially to set those incentives and set those processes early on, will definitely help you in the short but also long term. So I think that, I mean, of course you have to be smart about it. Like you're not going to write 1 million tests when you're the sole developer.
Right, yeah.
Like you need to write tests that have the most impact. So write tests that are like very front-end focused, that are very feature-oriented, to really test that it works for your customers. And you don't have to write 1 million like unit tests, although they're important for some parts. So definitely be smart about it. But yeah, automation, when you're a small team or like a single developer, it's just like not doing it and like keep doing it manually. It works until something breaks, and then it breaks really, really bad. And you don't have the time to put it in. So it's better to like do some of these small steps to really push in some more automation than wait for something like catastrophic to happen. And then you have to like really go in and do all at once.
I know exactly what you're talking about. I feel the pain sometimes.
Yeah, it happens. And I think that's like, and it's not like small things can really increase the velocity of a small or single person team a lot.
Hey, so I want to ask you, I actually used to be on GitHub, and that's when I used Codeship, but I recently switched over to GitLab because they actually offer private repos for free, and that helped me save a little bit of money as well, even though GitHub is not that expensive. But anyway, I actually like GitLab a little bit better, but Codeship doesn't support GitLab, and I know a lot of other CI services as well do not offer support for GitLab. Is there a reason why? Do they have different webhooks? What's the deal with that? Do you know?
No technical reason, just marketing basically.
Okay.
It's GitHub is by far the largest, and Bitbucket the second largest, basically source code management system, apart from like self-owned or self-hosted stuff. So it's just a market reason to do that. I think that's definitely we and also others definitely have plans at some point to support more. It's just a matter of how large is the market, what's the kind of marketing that we need to run, and also, simply put, that people who are already on GitHub, people who are already hosting different stuff in the cloud, are just more willing to go with like a hosted service like ours. So somebody who's actively using their own GitLab server because they don't want to host like on GitHub and have their stuff in the cloud is just less likely to use like Codeship for their CI as well.
Sure.
So it's a pure market and marketing decision basically. Technically, I don't think it would be that hard.
I was wondering. I was going to ask you if you thought that'd be hard or not, but it doesn't seem that hard.
I don't think it would be like that hard, especially because we have like support for GitHub and Bitbucket.
Yeah.
But I think as a startup, like it's extremely important to be very, very focused. Mm-hmm. And I think that and we've certainly run into that in the past as well, where we built features that we thought maybe people like it or not, but we didn't really test them or try to like understand them better first, or understand the need better. So over time we definitely got better at saying no, which is very, very important as a startup. Otherwise you'll just not succeed. if you're not starting and being willing to say no to many things and many opportunities, to really say yes to the right ones. So yeah, I think that's the main driver, the decision that we just don't, and I think I assume I can speak for most of the other providers in our space as well, that it's a lot of work, and it's not clear enough yet how big the impact is, especially when you see that we're not a hosted system.
Sure, no hard feelings.
Yeah.
Hopefully I can make something work eventually in the future, because I did enjoy using Codeship a lot. So hopefully I figure something out.
Yep.
Just to wrap up, speaking of goals and missions and focusing, what's your main focus with the company right now?
Do you mean as a company or me personally?
Let's say you personally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So my main focus, my main job here is really, I think that's something that happens for the CTO role is a lot of supporting other parts of the company. I think I'm involved in product stuff. I'm involved in like investor relations. I'm involved in a lot of marketing, so I write a lot of content. Kind of salesy, like going out and meeting with people, talking to our engineering team, thinking about our next growth phase and what things we need to cover and to make better for being able to grow the engineering team a lot more. I think it's a CTO role is a job that has very many different hats to wear, basically. And going back to what I said before, like you need to be comfortable with doing that, and comfortable and willing to do that.
Sure.
But yeah, it's a lot of different hats, and I think it's constantly changing, and it constantly depends on what the company needs at this point the most. But yeah, I think it's moving a lot in like kind of marketing and talking to customers, like the mix between product sales and marketing, where you write about the product, you talk to people using the product, or you sell the product. I think that mix is a lot of my job and a lot of my work now.
Well, I wish you and Codeship the best of luck in the future. Thanks for building a fantastic product that helps developers, and that's really why I wanted to have you on the show. That's what the show is about, helping developers find the right tools for the right job, and I do think that Codeship is a fantastic tool. So thanks a lot for doing this interview. One more question, then I'll let you go. What are, let's say, 2 of your favorite books, since you already told us one earlier?
So the book that I think definitely everybody should read who's either in a management role or not in a tech company is The Phoenix Project. I think that's a fantastic book, and I'm reading it every 6 to 9 months now, just to like get back into it. So it's about a team or a less functional, large software team that becomes more better, more productive over time, and packaged in a story. I think it's a really, really great book that definitely everybody should read. And I think another book, I mean, there's many different out there. I think it depends on the specific. I think that what everybody should start, especially in the CTO role or in a technical role where people move more into a management role, is really learn more about talking to people, understanding people, understanding their motivations and the direction that they're coming from. I think it's a lot of blog posts from people that I've read. And different stuff. I think there's many different books out there. There's books from how to talk to people, how to understand them, how to make them productive, how to even, like, interestingly enough, a lot of those that have things that I've read from people who were in that same role, like even books where people were talking about like the relationships, like how people talk to their children even, and that's something where they learn something from, how to talk to people better and really better understand people. But I think anything that you can read about people management, motivation, and how to better learn that is incredibly important. And I think that should be something that people should look into.
Great advice. Florian, thank you so much. It was a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thanks for
learned
having
a lot from this, and I'm sure many others have as well. If you did, please leave a comment below. Let Florian know how much you learned from this.
Yes, definitely.
And do check out Codeship as well. If people have questions or want to follow up with you or the team at Codeship, how would you recommend they do that?
So either send me an email, just flo@codeship.com, or on Twitter, I'm just Flo Matlik on Twitter. That's probably the best channels. But yeah, just send me an email. And if you have general questions about Codeship, of course, I mean, send us an email or send an email to contact@codeship.com or support@codeship.com. And then you can also get in touch with our support team, who are very, very fast and very diligent in how to get you any answers that you need.
You even have a chat box on the site itself, and I got
Yes.
to interact with a few of you people that way as well. Very fast to respond. So thank you all for watching. I hope you have a fantastic day. See you guys later.